It's hard to talk over this, but this is a live, and it'll be put on Substack. Judaism in America. And we'll see if we can get through this without being taken down. So, fingers crossed. Today's my mother's birthday. I'll explain in a minute, but we're going to listen to a little music first. This is the menorah from the Arch of Titus in Rome. And this is the legionaries looting the Second Temple. This is iced tea, by the way. It looks like whiskey, but it's not. Anyways, this is Leonard Bernstein doing Shostakovich's Concerto Number 2, and this is the Andante. It's a little bit hard to find on the internet. It's on YouTube. But the picture of Bernstein is with him with his sport coat over his shoulders, like smoking a cig with his hand on his head. So it's a good place to start for Judaism in America with Leonard Bernstein. That's a good start. So, all right, we'll come back to that. It's hard to turn it off though. So today's my mother's birthday. She is 83. And her favorite piece of music is Shostakovich's Fifth. So I made her breakfast, and she's downstairs right now eating a piece of chocolate cake, listening to Shostakovich's Fifth, just in her glory. So I put it on for her. She has no short-term memory, and her long-term memory is sort of decent. And she went, "What is this?" And I said, "I'll give you a hint, it's Russian." And a couple of minutes later, she said, I think she said Shostakovich. And I said, "Yeah, it's your favorite piece. It's the Fifth." And there's a funny, so whenever you're going to talk about Judaism, you always have to have some like disclaimer to sort of back out of the thing that you might be involved in some sort of anti-Semitism. So I have a couple of those for you. So the first one is, my mom loves to tell the story that she was at the beach at Cape May one time, and she had earphones in the early 80s when they were sort of like the thing with a Walkman. And I don't know, she was waiting for a piece of pizza or something, and she describes it as some little Jewish guy turned to me and said, "What are you listening to, Madonna?" And she said, "No, Shostakovich." And he went, "Oh my God, Shostakovich." And the reason is because, and the reason she tells the story, is there's not 2,500 people on the East Coast who know who Shostakovich is, and 80% of them are Jewish. So let's all calm down and get into some heavy-duty stuff. The other disclaimer I was going to do was, the old canard about I'm not anti-Semitic. A lot of my friends are Jewish. I was going to, say something like that, except I don't have any friends, so that doesn't work. But really, no, today's probably a pretty low point in the history of Judaism for what's going on in Tel Aviv. There's sort of like a celebration of peace, and, we've been having these, America has been having these semi-genocidal, completely illegal wars since 9/11, and now we're just having another one. So I wanted to talk about some of the things that I've done on TikTok, and then on Substack, and then some ideas I have going forward. And I wanted to start with a point that Camille Paglia made, and I think it's in the first or second chapter of her book that came out in the 90s. It was sort of like the grunge, philosophy book, Sexual Personae. Harold Bloom, who was my favorite professor at Yale, was a big proponent of Camille Paglia, big supporter. Anyways, it says that the real dominant force in America culturally is not white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, or the word we use now all the time is white nationalists. She pointed out that the real cultural forces at play in America are blacks and Jews. I think she's right. So let's go there. Let's have a little fun. It's Sunday. We've got 45 minutes until the Steelers are on. So I did 3 pieces on TikTok and Substack under the name Anti-Semitism. And I referenced 3 books, which I'll mention now. The first was Jewish History, Jewish Religion by Shehek, a professor of chemistry of all things, I believe in Tel Aviv. The introduction is by Gore Vidal, where he points out that somebody handed, I forget who, handed a suitcase filled with $2 million to Harry Truman in his re-election campaign in the 40s, which led to the creation of the support for America for Israel. The other book I did was a little bit more obscure, called American Zion, also by an Israeli professor. And that's a very unique take on American history that says that we've always been, as the name implies, to some degree Zionist, even before the creation of the State of Israel. That's an interesting thing to think about. And I think if I'd summarize it like AI would, the Old Testament, you can think of like the movie Lincoln or something like that. Like the Old Testament is sort of the basis of religiosity in America. We're not really like a New Testament kind of a country, right? We don't really, even to this day, we don't really talk about, I just saw some woman on TikTok just a minute ago say, there's almost like 2 kinds of Christians in America now, like the Beatitudes, like the real Christians, and the ones who want to just condemn people. I forget how she said it. It was a little bit better than that. But the Old Testament, like, we use this word pretty loosely, like this Judeo-Christianity kind of a thing. That's a pretty good word to use for to describe like the Republican Party. If I get through this without having this thing turned off or having my whole account shut down. And let's also bring that up. So 2 or 3 days after October 7, I lost 85,000 followers and a lot of content for suggesting what Jonathan Greenblatt said was Israel has a lot of influence over social media. And now the biggest private contributor to the IDF controls TikTok. So that is now self-evident, okay? So now the obvious thing to do if we really wanted to get mean-spirited would be, I did a piece last week it's now on Substack, called Super Death. And I talked about how technology and theology have formed a feedback loop in the United States. The war on terror, AI, Alex Karp, which I'll get to later. And instead of using the hexagram, I found a 7-pointed star and put it behind me, because America's usually represented like on a tank or something like that as like a 5-pointed star. So I was like, what could I make that's like spookier than the 2 of them? So I found a 7-pointed star. So you can go find that on. And I came up with that name myself, Super Death, after using the word Death Star to refer to the country with the hexagram on its flag. So American Zion, mentioned that, Jewish History, Jewish Religion. And what was the third? Oh, Josephus Bella Judaicum, which I had to read at Yale for Ramsey McMullen in Introduction to Roman History, and I was very proud that I got an A in the class. And yeah. So I hadn't read it for, 35 years. And I've almost come to the conclusion that is what we need to go back to. When I say we, I mean we, like Americans, anybody interested in these issues. So that's why I put the Arch of Titus behind me with a menorah, because this is the legionaries cleaning out and destroying the Second Temple. So, yeah. So we want to get in here in a minute to the 2 people that are really running the show in America, and they are Alex Karp, the CEO of Palantir, and Stephen Miller. And at first glance, these two people, you might describe them as right wing. However, Alex Karp was trained in Germany for his philosophy PhD, not by Husserl, by Habermas, and who was trained by the Frankfurt School, who were the European Marxists who then came to the United States and sat around and figured out how to destroy America culturally so that they could bring in Marxism. That's Alex Karp. So he's on the left. He's like a neo-Marxist. So then on the right we have Stephen Miller, who talks a lot like the Mustache Man crowd. And it just openly says that the real enemy of the Trump administration are Americans. So this is where we are. So we now have like the two like horrors of the 20th century merged here in America in the White House. So how did we get here? So the other piece I did was there's all this talk. I started it with talking about Death Star, and once in a while I would do a piece about eschatology and Islamic eschatology and Dajjal. I mean, I did this for years on here, right? And then lo and behold, Peter Thiel comes on and starts talking about the Antichrist. And it was all, like, I actually thought I was sort of getting off the rails, and some of my subscribers did too. And then lo and behold, in an interview, somebody asked Peter Thiel about the Antichrist. So if you think you're going to get away from America and not talk about religion, you're wrong. So let's all calm down and also look at this book. Let's look at this book. This book. It's written in 1991. Pretty sure about that. And it quotes, 91 is the acknowledgments, and published in 92. And it references Soren Kierkegaard, who, in reference to the revolution of 1848, I won't read it to you, but says that the revolution was really political, but it was really religious. And that's where we are with America. That's why I'm talking to you on a Sunday. It's a little bit humid, so I'd open up my tie in front of a menorah from the Ark of Triumph, or the Ark of Titus in Rome. Because we're in a religious crisis. And I'll tell you what I came to my conclusion after following those three books, doing three pieces on anti-Semitism. And I really think you should take this and like the canard, my Jewish friends, send it to your Jewish friends. I want to like engage like the Jewish community, and I'll explain to you here why in a minute. So, so I tied together the way that we're talking about AI is in a religious way. We're literally, I'd like to just hold these books up for you. Building God. We're literally, Tim Dillon has great fun with this, with Peter Thiel being like, I'm the founder of a company, Palantir, that creates software systems to, exterminate people around the earth. And then on the side, on the weekends, I do, I'm a specialist on the Antichrist. It's funny for someone like Tim Dillon, and also not funny. So, okay, so this is probably the toughest thing that I'm going to talk about, and that's a lot of Americans don't know that Judaism is 4,000 years old. It's really like more complexity than, it's not the Old Testament, right? Most of us go to Sunday school and we read the Torah and we can quote like things from the Psalms and so forth. But as you know, Judaism is much more complicated than that. There's two other major texts, and the Talmud, of course, and then the Kabbalah and the Zohar. Now, here's where America gets a little complicated. And that is with a kind of pseudo-religion called Masonry. Now, if you drive across the heartland, every time you go into a small town or city, you will see a sign that tells you where the Masonic temple is. And the great American thinker and writer in that space is, of course, Albert Pike, and founder of the Pointy Hat people after the Civil War. We'll get to that this week. And he says that that Masonry is really the one pure religion of Lucifer, and also based on the Kabbalah. So George Washington took the oath. If you go to Wall Street, there's the City Hall, there's the J.P. Morgan office, which is now owned by China, and there's the New York Stock Exchange, and there's a statue of George Washington with his Masonic apron on, with his hand over the Bible. And he went to an Episcopal church, rarely took communion. The conspiracy is his slaves said that on his deathbed he asked to see a Jesuit priest, but that's a conspiracy, and let's all just get back to the facts. No, but Masonry is really, if you really did a deep dive into American religion, I would disagree with this book a little bit, that Christian Gnosticism is not really the foundation of America. The foundation of America is really Masonry. Like in 1,000 years, when people go and do the archaeology of Washington, D.C., they're just going to see that it's Masonry through and through. You with me? So, the Zohar. Teaches, like Gnosticism, that the world is a very fallen place, not like Christians are taught about original sin, but that existence itself is fallen. And not Yahweh, but Ein Sof, that created the world, the universe as we know it, quote, broke the pottery in the process, so that the universe as we know it is something that's gone wrong, and there's people that are here to fix it. And you can see how that would overlap with things like Marxism, and I'm telling you that Alex Karp is a neo-Marxist. And you could also see how that would overlap with something like a very aggressive Zionism like Stephen Miller, who just openly stands up and says on CNN, I think it was this week, he says Donald Trump has plenary authority with the National Guard. The President of the United States can do whatever he wants with the National Guard. There are no rules, there are no laws. The same applies to Marxism, right? The Marxists were going to create all the new laws all across Europe and Russia and the Bolshevik Revolution. Now in America, Linda, you got the Linda finger on that, those two things have merged. Those two things have merged now in America. So Stephen Miller to me is like when we've all seen Schindler's List, and the people that go through the ghetto and round up the population of the ghetto and get them on the trains are Zionists. Stephen Miller is one of those people in the movie. That's who Stephen Miller is. And now they are connected to the neo-Marxists through AI, what Alex Karp called I always say theological, it's clearly a Freudian slip, the technological republic. So as a thesis for you here on a Sunday, I'll ask you this. It's quite possible that everything that we are seeing on television, financial, executive orders, the price of gold, possibly staged events, could be being determined by AI. That's what that book proposes. The idea is from Yarvin to Thiel to Alex Karp is, do we even fucking need a Congress? Now remember, the U.S. Congress has not had a budget since 1995. What do you mean it hasn't? It has no budgetary process. 3,000 pages hit the table at 7 o'clock in the morning, and everybody has to vote by 11:30. There's no budgetary process. In our lifetime, since we came out of college, the U.S. government just runs on continuing resolutions. In other words, the democracy as we think of it is really something very different than we learned in 5th grade. Okay? But let's go to the holiest of holies, the First Amendment. So I may be repeating myself. I was sort of preparing in my mind. But as I went through those 3 books, I came up with 3 conclusions. So if you've ever been to a Catholic Mass, like you get a missalette, and there's 3 readings, and they're usually from the Torah, and then like a letter from Paul or Peter, and then the words of Christ. And the Christian religion is very much based on this idea that my kingdom is not of this world. Okay, that's the words of Christ. As none other than Ben Shapiro would explain, the Jewish Messiah is political. See the difference? And Islam is completely worldly. So I came to 3 conclusions doing these anti-Semitic pieces. And I don't think they're really offensive to anybody. One, it's not well defined in the Jewish tradition. Is this an otherworldly, heavenly religion? This thing is because like they're the chosen people and blessed, and the candles burnt for 7 days or whatever it was. A miracle. And the burning bush and Abraham and the whole thing. So that's a problem. It's not really clear if it's like a religion or the law of Moses. Secondly, there's not a structure like the Catholic or Orthodox Church which can police orthodoxy and non-orthodoxy and people that are out of line and excommunicate them and so forth. It's sort of like anybody can run around the world and say, like Netanyahu, and say, we or I represent the Jewish people. And the third thing is those 1 and 2 contradict the first line of the Bill of Rights. So we have a church and state. Frequently on Sunday I call these things church and state. I just ramble about issues of church and state. And now we're in a situation where the First Amendment is gone. Everybody's talking about Tim Dillon, Candace Owen, like all the podcast world, Tucker Carlson, who I think is some sort of controlled outlet, but that's okay. The Constitution and the Technological Republic really argues that we don't really need that shit anymore. So let's get into some basic numbers. Again, there's not like any venom in this. This is just demographics. Maybe we need a moment of musical interlude. Bernstein. Play Cardi B. Well, I'm glad I just thought of this. Shostakovich, of course, is Jewish and lived under Stalin and during the purges, and I think this was written during, I think Shostakovich's Fifth was written during World War II, maybe even during Stalingrad. And he slept in the hall so that if the Cheka, the secret police, came to take him away to a gulag, they wouldn't wake up his family. The U.S. Congress just allocated $170 billion for ICE agents that came under the Department of Homeland Homeland Security, which was created after 9/11, to create something that is not unlike the Cheka. And for those of you who know what that word is, you know. And then we could reference the other people in Germany that, the ideology doesn't matter. There's just random people in paramilitary uniforms running around American cities now. This was not done by the Christian nationalist far right. Feeling me? Stephen Miller is not a Christian nationalist. Alex Karp is not a Christian nationalist. But this is where we are. So let's... The key point I want to make out is that both sides of these groups are completely lawless, have no reference to the Constitution, and the Supreme Court has jumped the shark and has... I'm going to do some work on the Civil War. Racial profiling is now part of the American experience like it was before the Civil War. So we're moving in, the United States is starting to look a lot like a nation divided by religion and ethnic groups. In the Financial Times, it's reported that when the kids in Israel go to kindergarten, they're separated between dark and light. Financial Times, that's not some weird conspiracy thing, that's the Financial Times. We have gangs of masked paramilitaries throwing middle-aged Hispanic people to the ground and then driving them away in vans to who the fuck knows where. So what I really wanted to get into, and then I'll wind this down because we've amazingly gotten through 27 minutes of this without getting turned off. I mean, it's really amazing. Half of the world's Jews live in the United States, the other half live in Israel. Outside of those two nations, the numbers are very, very small. I think it's 3 or 4 million. So there's about 8 million here, there's about 8 million over there. Over there is... Nobody knows how that works over there. It has no reference to international law, no reference to the UN anymore. Just, we're supposed to celebrate that 20 citizen hostages have been released, and 80% of the victims of the so-called war against Hamas are women and children. It looks a lot like the things that we did in this continent to the Native Americans. I think ultimately the UN will leave New York. There's lots of people talking like that. The UN can't even really do its work because the people representing the Palestinians are not allowed to go. Some of them are not allowed to go there. Think about that. After the 20th century, the UN leaving New York. If that doesn't show a significant loss of power, I don't know what does. Just to run the numbers by you, since 9/11, the US dollar is down versus gold by 80%. If you really look at the strategic position of the United States, the day after 9/11, we should have done nothing. We lost 3,000 people. We had $3 trillion in debt. We now have $37 trillion. We should have just, like Leonard Bernstein there, just had a cig break and had a week of national mourning and moved on. Instead, we invaded every country we could find on false pretenses illegally, from Tripoli to Kabul. Our debt went up 12x. The dollar went from $270 for an ounce of gold, and it just clipped 4,000. And again, I just want to keep setting this up for you. Roughly speaking, half of the world's Jews live in Israel, and the other half live in the United States. And we have masked paramilitaries roaming big American cities where most American Jews live. This could go wrong. I'll go further. This is going wrong. Pete, let's go back to Alex Karp and his right-wing sidekick, Stephen Miller. These people have no instinct even to pretend to go along with the law. The book, The Technological Republic, is an argument that we don't need the law anymore. There's this thing in crypto where they say code is law, and Alex Karp has taken this to some sort of metaphysical absurdity that everything in the United States is going to be run by fucking Palantir's AI. Just like Marxism, right? So they brought in Marxism, like if you do like the Bolshevik Revolution in your head. Most Americans don't know anything about the Bolshevik Revolution. And there might be a reason for that. In fact, there's nothing written in English on what happened to the Tsar's gold. And again, this is just to wind conspiracy theories on top of conspiracies. There just isn't anything that says what happened to most likely the biggest gold hoard in the world after the Bolsheviks took over. So they tried to implement Marxism, right? And it was just horror after horror. And we can all go read Solzhenitsyn, right? And it just talks of the gulags and, roads and canals with millions of people buried in them. Until eventually, in Boxing Day of 1991, the Russian people finally said that Marxism was a lot of fun, but we're going to try something else. We're going down that road, folks. We're going down that road. It's not Donald Trump. There's not an 80-year-old asshole named Joe Biden or Donald Trump that runs this country. No, that's just silly. That's for children and people that watch too much cable TV. So again, now let's talk about over there. So I follow this Muslim eschatologist named Sheikh Imran Hussein, and he says that the Quran, and I did some work on this, the Quran suggests that Constantinople, otherwise known as Turkey, will eventually flip out of NATO, out of its Western allegiance, and, quote, liberate Jerusalem. And the plan for Jerusalem is to rebuild the temple. I think it was 10 days ago, there was a picture of Netanyahu in the tunnel underneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The heifers have been slaughtered. The third temple is going to be built, just like the Masons have tried to prepare for the last several hundred years. So, in this country, as we are losing all constitutionality, all references to any sort of legal precedent, I guess my question is is this really what you want to live under? I don't mean it with like any venom or like sarcasm or anything. Like, is this really what we want to do? Let's do the Democratic Party, right? It's interesting, before the Civil War, the Whig Party fell apart because of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. It was seen as like the thing, like Lincoln was a Whig. Like that was the thing, like holding it all together, like holding the Democratic, Southerners like in their place. In a similar way, the Democratic Party in this country is completely worthless. Bernie Sanders runs around the Midwest and says, "Send me $2,700 or send me $27." What the fuck are you going to do with $27? Like buy off ICE? According to Forbes, 50% of the funding for the Democratic Party comes from Americans who identify as Jewish. That's not an accusation. That's, again, just demographics. And I think I'll go out on this. Oh, yeah, let's just tell us. I like a yarn as good as the next guy. So let me go out with like the disclaimer. A lot of my friends are Jewish. So my dad, I just told you about my mom. She's 84. She loves Shostakovich, and it's a pretty unusual thing for a woman with no education to like sort of obscure Russian classical music. But my dad had the biggest in the 50s, or I guess late 40s, early 50s, had the biggest paper route in Pittsburgh. And he was a poor German Irish kid. And that paper route was in Highland Park, which was like an upper middle class Jewish neighborhood. It's still there, nice big sort of German looking houses. And all his ne'er-do-well uncles would always say, be careful down there with them. They're going to cheat. And he's like, it's all bullshit. He said, that's all bullshit. So this was, how you can sort of read your parents when you're young? Like you can sort of see their intonations and their body language, like what they're really trying to tell you. And then he went on to start a medical laboratory, and all his business partners were Jewish. He would go to these big hospitals in Pittsburgh and peel out these brilliant pathologists that had like no ability to navigate the politics of the hospitals. So he would just say, why don't you just come work with me? You'll make more money and you'll have, my dad doesn't have any degree, has no college degree, but ran a medical laboratory. And so there's that, nice, a lot of my friends are Jewish kind of a thing. And then I went to prep school, which was like the dormitory was like 2/3 Jewish, and primarily from New York. And my, the kid that played center for me, I saw him 25 years later. We had like a reunion, and he took a trip with his friend down the eastern coast of Africa, which on their way back, they stopped in Israel. And I don't know if he was a very observant person, but he said it was his least favorite country. I don't think American Jews really understand Israel. I don't really think that they understand that it's not really the religious, and this is why you see so many rabbis in Brooklyn, like out of their minds about what's going on over there. And I think, again, Jewish friends, I was at a Seder in LA when I was right out of college because I was engaged to a girl who was half Jewish, and there were 6 psychoanalyst couples there. And the cosmopolitan aspect of the Jewish American community does not apply to Israel. And this is a problem. And I think a lot of people have thought, well, that's making it safe for everybody. It's not making it safe for anyone. Not here or there. And, all right, let's talk a little bit of Turkey here, since, not that Turkey, but, so Netanyahu attacked Iran openly, which resulted in a massive barrage coming back the other way, to include hypersonic missiles that fly 9,000 miles an hour. Believe it or not, in the Quran and in the book of Revelation, 2 interesting things that I did work on here and on Substack. The Quran mentions there's references to a liberation of Jerusalem, which is something to think about. And there's also several references to hyperspeed, quote, sudden death. One of the missiles that Iran struck, I think, the port of Haifa with or an airport, was a hypersonic. China, Russia, and Iran have hypersonic missiles. The United States of America does not. They fly at 9,000 miles an hour. Ukraine has been hit by one. You can go watch the video of it. You'll watch this strange photonic wedge come down, not really moving that fast. That's not the missile, that was the plasma following the thing going 9,000 miles an hour. The other reference that's weirdly overlaps the Quran and the Book of Revelation is this statement of a unleashing of a corruption. And I did a lot of work. I used AI to help me sort through things and find other sources and so forth. But that would be AI. This is what everybody in the world of AI talks about, that is afraid it's going to loosen a corruption that we won't be able to put back away, like a virus, like a biological virus. But it doesn't really reference like a plague. It just, weirdly, it just says a corruption, something that gets out and can't be put back away. And this is what the technological republic is. The book isn't, go get it, go read it. The book is an argument to use AI in an eschatological way. Alex Karp tells us, I'll put the two together and wind this down. Trump and Stephen Miller now say, and I've said this for 5 years on here, eventually the war on terror is going to come home, and you, the American citizen, are going to be the terrorists. That just happened this week. We are now the terrorists. Liberal professors in Oregon are now terrorists. A professor who wrote a book about Antifa tried to fly to Spain. They pulled his passport, and he's not allowed to leave the country. Nobody should be more sensitive to these things than American Jews who came to America. None other than Gene Simmons, like tells the story of watching television with his mother, and the national anthem would come on at midnight. Remember the flag, when the television channels used to go out at midnight? Remember that? And he said she would frequently break down in tears. Remember, this is the guy with the blood and the tongue and the bass and all that, the platform shoes. He would say my mom would cry every time she'd see that and say, "We're safe now." Yeah. So things are fucked up. So Stephen Miller reports that the enemy is now within America. The First Amendment's gone. Okay? And then on the other side, who's their teammate, AI is not just going to be used to patrol and geofence Americans. It will ultimately be used for war against Russia, China, and Iran. This is a guy who named his company after a Lord of the Rings book. He's living like in a fucking Star Wars episode. These are the people running the United States of America. The land of FDR and Reagan and Teddy Roosevelt are now being run by dicks. And the Democratic Party wants us to go vote for a girl who is basically a sugar baby. She was sleeping with the governor who was like 62 when she was like 27. That's who we're going to vote for instead of what's in the White House currently. So let's all calm down. So I'm going to do some pieces on the Civil War this week. I'm going to parallel the Civil War and what's going on now. I think we're going like backwards through the Civil War. You follow me? It's not like we're hitting in 1860 and the country's dividing and attacking itself. It's like it's almost retrograding back into the antebellum South. We have like, the battery ran out. We have like ICE are basically like the bounty hunters that ran through the North and would just pick up random African Americans and put a bag over their head and drag them back into the South. Sound familiar? It's happening every day in large American cities. So, a reasonable person would suggest maybe we need some sort of new party. So I did some homework and found that there was some, not nationalist, but national. There was something called the National Party that popped out of the Socialist Party, the party of Eugene Debs. And you might remember leading up to World War I, because, you know, the Imperial Germany was going to invade Nebraska or some bullshit like that, we had to go to war in Europe. And they passed the Alien and Sedition Act, and the Socialist Party was officially against the war. They put Eugene Debs, I think, in jail for the duration of the war. And part of the Socialists jumped out and formed, they were pro-war and socialist, and they created something called the National Party. I'm suggesting we create a third party that would not so much run national candidates as clearly define what is in the national interest and what isn't. Things like healthcare, infrastructure, like basic government stuff. Now, as we go on with this completely absurd, multi-trillion-dollar boondoggle called the attempt to build God with artificial general intelligence, machines will never be conscious. That's a religious and metaphysical problem that these people continually say. If we build bigger and bigger and bigger enough large language models. I mean, this is interesting. Like, think about this for a minute. The Prophet Muhammad referred to Jews as the people of the book. Right? Like, the idea that you can just regurgitate all the language. Now, understand that the large language models aren't really sophisticated linguists. They just regurgitate the textual world in a mathematical basis, in probability. And the probability is going to achieve consciousness. The large language models don't even know what a sentence means. It was explained that large language models don't know that Michael Jordan was the best basketball player because they've ever witnessed a basketball game. It's just in the text. It's just probably the fact that Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player of all time because they've read it in the magazine, so to speak. They don't know anything. The machine doesn't know anything about basketball. It's never seen a game. It can't abstract a game. It can't video game a game. It can't create a sort of a scientific model to even know what basketball is. And this is the godlike entity that they're trying to create this general intelligence with. This is a religious problem. We need a new party that can comprehend things like, if we build large language models and data centers as big as cities, the grid's going to go down. So we'll have masked paramilitaries roaming the streets of American cities that have no fucking electricity. Maybe that's what they want. I mean, there is an argument there that what they really want is depopulation. That was what I argued last week. I said the new business model is Gaza. Super death. That's where we're headed. So my question to you is, I've already explained the geopolitical strategic situation of 7 million people in an area the size of New Jersey that can be struck by missiles flying 9,000 miles an hour. It's a little questionable over there. If it goes wrong here, like, where's everybody going to go? That's how. It's not a. I don't say that in a confrontational way. So I also did a piece on Substack called Catholicism and Judaism, where I said the main ethnic structure of the Democratic Party through the 20th century was minorities. In big industrial cities in the Northeast, for example, like a Pittsburgh or like a Detroit, the Democratic Party was basically the Catholic Party, and the Republican Party was sort of like the Protestant Party. And the Jews generally are over here. And the reason I'm going on about this for the Democratic Party is a milquetoast fish trap of gender dysphoria and carbon bullshit. And it has not protected the nation or the Constitution from these fucking weirdos like Karp and Miller. And we have a problem thereby. The good guys may not win. The good guys won, right, through the blue and the gray thing. Like, we look back on it, it all seems to worked out. Gettysburg and Grant, and it all looks sort of like glorious, and flags, and the good guys may not win this time. The 20th century gives us a taste of what this looks like when it goes wrong. Those two nations would probably be Germany and Russia. That's why so many of you are here.